Hi everyone, so in today's video I'm going to be making a huge publication announcement and also doing a little Q&A and journey to writing the pieces that got published. So let's jump right in and talk about everything that I've gotten published recently. So the first thing was a poem in Augur magazine, which is called We Sell Skin on Sale. It appears in issue 3.2 and it's kind of surreal. I was not expecting that poem to be picked up. So a few things to note before we dig in. This poem is actually nominated for the 2021 Riesling Award, which is very kind. Let's talk about how I wrote We Sell Skin on Sale. So We Sell Skin on Sale is a prose poem advertisement kind of thing. I highly recommend supporting Augur magazine if you have the funds to do so, and you can read the poem in there. I wrote this poem in a fever dream back in the summer. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning. I was not thinking I was gonna write anything, but this lightning bolt of let's write this poem now just occurred to me. And this happens a lot to me where I will write things and they just kind of occur on the page. Like I didn't set out to write them. They were just kind of like gifted to me. That's how I see it, at least. So I wrote it at like 1 o'clock in the morning. And then I forgot about it for like 2 weeks. I didn't really think about it. I didn't reread it. And then 2 weeks later, I saw that Augur was doing submissions and I wanted to submit something. I wasn't quite sure. So I submitted this poem and I was actually kind of second guessing myself. I was like, I'm not sure. I don't think it's gonna fit. Augur has this really fantastic, they have this thing on their website where they say, don't self-reject. Like, just send the work, like don't self-reject your work. And that is the reason I submitted this poem. I've been using that kind of as a great mantra ever since. So like I said, this is a paid issue that will be linked in the description if anybody wants to support it. It's really cool, guys. There's like some even like beautiful illustrations. This is the cover. It's gorgeous, right? So the next thing I got published is actually a poem called The Drive Up Microphone at Burger King, and it appears in issue 40 of Carte Blanche, which is one of my favorite writers is published in Carte Blanche, and so I was not expecting me to be published in Carte Blanche. This is a free issue that you can read online and you get support, and there is tons of writing. I needed to write a quick submission for like a magazine, and it didn't end up getting picked up by that magazine, but I ended up writing this poem. It didn't take very long. It was kind of like one of my typical, wrote it in 5 minutes, I'm sending it to a magazine, and the magazine liked it. Despite the fact that it took so little time, I think it is one of my better poems, and I find that happens a lot. Like my best work takes less time because again I'm taken on this like trance, and so the writing appears on the page. I submitted this piece at 11:59 p.m. on the day of the deadline. I had meant to submit, and then I don't know, time got away from me, and then I was on Instagram and another one of the magazines I follow like had reposted the submission deadline for Carte Blanche, and I was like, oh, I have tons of time to submit to that. I'll submit something. I looked at the clock and it was 11:55, and I was like, oh, it was a mad dash, but it was a fantastic experience, and I am so honored to be featured in issue 40. So like I said, the poem is free to read. So the next publication that I want to announce, I die for this publication. I have it here with me. So this is my issue of the Malahat Review, everybody. My short story, Primary Organs, is featured in issue 213, which is the winter 2020. I just want you to, if you haven't seen it, just, do you see anything that's familiar to you there? Do you see it? Do you see at all? Like, anything look familiar? My name is on the front cover. I cried how I reacted to when I got this acceptance. I had just gotten out of a dentist appointment, and in the dentist's office, I was on my phone and I was looking up recipes. I was like, right after this appointment, I'm gonna be like a bad person and like not do what you're supposed to do after a dentist. I'm gonna eat something. So I'm gonna cook this soup or something. I'll put the recipe. It's a Marian's Kitchen recipe. I'm so excited about it. I went with my parents because they had appointments too. And so we're walking back to the car, and I get this email, and I'm not expecting an acceptance. I see it's from the Malahat Review. I'm like not expecting anything. Like I was like, I don't know, this story's gotten rejected 8 times already. Like no one seems to want it. It probably is, I don't know. Like I'm feeling kind of insecure about it. But I open the email when I'm outside, and it's congratulations, like, we would love to publish, but something like that. And I screamed. We were in the middle of the parking lot. I just started screaming. People probably, I don't know, I hope there was nobody around, but my parents, they were like, hey, like, what's going on? Are you okay? And I was like, yeah, I'm getting a short story published in the Malahat Review. And we all started screaming. Then I went to the grocery store, which is like right across from the dentist, and I was like, dude, I'm so making my celebratory soup because I really want it. My mom was like, why don't we just, like, relax? Like, you will get something to celebrate. And I was like, no, I want my soup. So I made my celebratory soup. It took a few hours, and in those hours I was still freaking out. And then when I ate the soup, I was like, oh my god, I'm getting published in the Malahat Review. So this is me. I'm kind of shocked. It's very kind that they put me on the front. I don't know what I did to deserve this. This is a page issue. You can buy like the print like this. It's really beautiful. Or you can buy the ebook version. I believe there's like an e option. I will link the Malahat store. Something that's fantastic is I did an interview with the Malahat Review, and they actually asked if they could put like a little excerpt, and there's actually a free excerpt of Primary Organs, like a good solid like chunk of excerpt on the interview if you want to read it. And I hope that you pick up the issue because like there's so many talented writers in here. If you also want to check out the interview itself, I talk about like my writing process and why empathy is integral in my writing process. I also talk about how writing short stories has helped me like write novels, and also writing as a becoming and like an excavation. So if you want to hear more about my like weird writing process, I talked about it in the interview, and like I said, you can also read an excerpt of the short story. So let's talk about how I wrote Primary Organs. So I was in my first year of my undergrad. I'm almost done my second. So it was about a year ago, actually, early March of 2020, like before the pandemic, when I was still in my dorm, and I drafted this story. This lightning strike came to me, and this story unfurled. Primary Organs just took over. It was like, I need you to transcribe me on the paper right now because this story is from the sky and it needs to go onto paper. In haze, I wrote this story out. It was a beautiful experience that I don't know. I don't know what I do to deserve these beautiful writing experiences. Sometimes I just can't believe it. But yeah, this story just appeared basically on the page. It was really exciting, and it was like the last normal thing that I did before the pandemic. So this story has a lot of love in my heart for so many different reasons. I am so honored to have it in such a beautiful magazine that I love. And so yeah, that is the publication announcement part of this video. I also asked you guys to send me in any questions you had around publishing, around the projects, and so let me dive into those answers. So the first question is there anything you learned through submitting/publishing that you wish you could have known going into it? Something I learned is that there is no ideal submission. Don't hold back from submitting your work because you're like, I'm not sure if this magazine is gonna like that. I have done that for every single piece that I've submitted to and gotten published. I've been like, Rachel, I don't know, maybe this isn't the right submission, maybe this isn't good enough. And I always have to step back and remind myself of like that saying on Ogre's website, do not self-reject yourself. Just send it in. Like, what's the worst that could happen? Like, you're gonna get a rejection. It's not too bad. So the next question is, how do you search for magazines/journals to submit to? Were you already subscribed to them, or is there some kind of database? So I will link for Canadian magazines because I submit primarily to Canadian magazines. I am Canadian and I prefer getting published in Canadian magazines, and also magazines that pay, but that is a different conversation. I will link a CBC blog post that outlines like A to Z. It doesn't cover every single one of them, but it covers a solid chunk. So unfortunately, the way that I learned about magazines is either through friends or my university. So I am in a writing program, and so naturally you're gonna hear a lot about literary magazines. Usually when I was at like readings, or like even readings that weren't associated with my university, but even readings that were, people's bios, like they'll state like where they were published, and so that can really expose you to more magazines. But there's tons of lists. I highly recommend going on that journey yourself, finding magazines that you vibe with, that you read, that you follow on social media, you like their vibe. So the next question is, how do you go about taking a concept, vibe, or aesthetic and turning it into a short story? There's a technique. I think it might be a Raymond Carver technique where you have like one sentence and then you just keep building on that sentence. That's a great way to like take a weird story, especially if you have a vibe, you have a sentence, you have a concept, but you don't know what it's about. Just slowly parse your way through it. Other than that, if you have a concept or a vibe, put characters in it, put a situation in it, see if you can untangle something by just playing around. Really, that's my advice. Just play around with it. See what comes of it. Somebody asked a question. I loved your video about verbiage. Do you have any more tips for coming up with your own verbs? If you have an interesting word that comes to you, but you're like, is this a verb or is it not? Just use it as a verb. I do agree with that, but I also have been learning a lot about verbs in my poetry class, in my poetry workshop, I should say. And my prof is very, very smart. Language in general, like the things that you pair together, they need to have some sort of like a logical relationship. So I think he mentioned something about scale. So if you're thinking about similes, I think actually he was talking about similes and not verbs, but the same thing applies. If you have two things, say your sentence was, the tears fell like a backwards jaguar. Backwards jaguar and the tears fell, like they're not really correlating. I can't really understand, especially speaking of scale, like tears kind of small, backwards jaguar, that's big. And also I don't really understand how those two things are correlating. You would rather, when constructing a simile, say the tears fell like, and then something that's a little bit more related or in the same scale as tears and falling. Not something that's completely unrelated. It doesn't have to be the tears fell like the rain or whatever. Like, it doesn't have to be that related, but just thinking about scaling your similes in the correct way. And I think of verbs in the same way. So when you're thinking of creating a new verb, you can use verbs in like the way they're not intended to. You can use it however you want. However, when you're creating new verbs, really try to see if those verbs are fitting with what you're saying. Like, even if like they're not fully making sense, like definitionally, do those verbs work tonally? Are they working in terms of scale? Does that make sense? So the next question is, I noticed a lot of your published pieces are quite experimental. What drives you to create experimental pieces? I guess I just have weird ideas. And what drives me is the idea that I shouldn't stop myself from doing something because I want to do it. So why should I stop myself? These ideas can be a bit scary to writers. The way I approach it is how I would approach anything. Literally dive into it with the most amount of empathy that you can. Don't go into an experimental piece trying to like make fun of it or trying to like joke around with the concept. I mean, unless that is your intention. Go into it with serious empathy. How do I find homes for these pieces? Like I was saying before, I feel like I get lucky a lot with where my pieces end up landing because sometimes I'm not expecting where they do. I would just submit. If you read a magazine and you see something in it that speaks to you and you're like, I feel like this might be a good home, submit there. I wouldn't let the experimentalness of your piece hold you back unless the magazine and their submission guidelines is like, we are absolutely not going to publish experimental pieces. Just send us like your grounded realism. So the next question is, do you write stories for magazines or do you find magazines for your stories? I've tried to write stories to match a magazine's criteria, but I found it limiting and I wasn't proud of what I made. So I never write stories with a magazine in mind. Sometimes I will write a story with a contest in mind. So for example, if I'm entering some contest and they have like a word count limit, then I will make sure that the story I write will fit around that. But I don't ever write it around their like guidelines or their vibe. I can see why somebody might want to do that. And if you want to, go ahead. But if you're finding that it's limiting, it's probably because magazines have criteria, but from what I've noticed, magazine criteria is not like exactly a be all end all. So it's probably not even really like a necessary thing to do to just write what you think a magazine is going to want to publish. I know like there's probably a magazine that you really want to be published in. I have that too, a dream magazine, and it's tempting to like just write what you think they're going to want to write. But Magazines go through so many different processes, so many different people are going to read it. Writing is really subjective, so even if they liked one person's story, your take on a story that's similar could be differently received or vice versa. So I would just write what you want to write and submit it to a magazine that you're feeling confident about or that you're really interested in. I'd love to hear about how you started submitting your work. Whenever I see people talk about it, it just feels so foreign, and I wonder how people begin. How I started submitting my work, I just did. When you're in university for writing, I guess there's naturally talk about publishing. You're reading a lot of stuff from literary magazines, and I kind of was like, I want this for myself. And I wrote something that I liked so much that I wanted it to be shared. How I suggest starting to submit your work is do it. Like, you gotta do it. If you're thinking like one day I want to be published, well, why not now? That's not to say that you have to publish your work, because you guys know that I am absolutely supportive of people writing personally. I do it all the time. But if you are somebody who has wanted to submit their work, but you're just holding yourself back because maybe you're nervous, and not for a reason that's because, you know, you just want your work to be personal, for example, then see if you can submit somewhere. Really, the only way to start submitting is to go out and try it. If anybody's trying to submit their work, I highly recommend watching my friend Shaylin's video on submitting work. I remember watching it when I was a little nervous to submit, and it made me feel a lot better. The next question is, when do you feel like your piece is ready? I always struggle with feeling like I could edit it just a little more. I get you. I really get you. It's kind of with the submission thing though. Like, it's never gonna be ready. Like, I don't reread my published work because I know I'm gonna see things that I want to change. How I know a story is ready to submit is when I'm happy with it overall. Like, sometimes there might be little things that I could still tweak forever, not because they're bad, but because as writers, we can always do that to ourselves. We're our worst critics. So how I knew Primary Organs was ready is I edited it, I read it, I gave it to a friend. I gave it to another friend. They all read it. I read it again. I liked it. So I submitted it to a magazine. How many places will you typically send out one short story or poem? It really depends. For my first publication, which was My Wolf Lives on the Windowsill, I think I can check the submission manager for that. I submitted that poem 4 times and it was published. Primary Organs, I submitted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 times, I think. And it got rejected from basically everywhere. It had 8 rejections, I think. Really, it depends on how much like I want to submit a piece. Sometimes like I just keep hammering out the submissions, and I know I should be more patient and not just like send my work out so much, but like really submitting is what gives me lifeblood at this point. Like, it is my joy and my happiness, so I'm always submitting my work. In the pandemic, I could say it could range from about like 3 to 20 places. What's a ballpark number on the percentages of rejection/acceptances? Again, this is really subjective, especially depending on how many magazines I've sent my work to. I can expect for maybe every 20, I can expect a acceptance. Been a lot of luck. I've gotten a lot of stuff published over the last year, and that was like a lot of luck and joy and love for these magazines who published my work. How does that relate to the size of the magazine or publication? Usually I expect rejections from bigger publications, just because, like, I don't know, maybe I'm being insecure. Usually magazines that are bigger have like very small acceptance rates. I wouldn't worry too much about that anyway. Just submit the work, you'll be fine. That's going to be the end of this video. Thank you guys so much for watching and for all the support. Please check out the magazines. They're really sweet, and everybody that I've worked with from those magazines are really, really kind, and so they deserve all of the love and support in the world. That's going to be it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!